Hearing the order, I'd like to welcome everyone to our hearing and to my good friend, Mrs. Hartzler from Missouri, and for her participation in putting this hearing together. This is the mandatory remote hearing script that you've all heard many times, and we'll repeat it today. I welcome all the members remotely joining today's hearing. Members participating must be visible on screen for the purposes of identifying and verification, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in proceedings, and voting. Members must continue to use software platform video function the entire time while they are in attendance, unless experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render them unable to participate on camera. If a member is experiencing technical difficulties, they should contact the committee staff for assistance. Video of members participating on Cisco WebEx is being broadcast via hashed internet live stream. Members must seek recognition verbally and are asked to mute their microphones when not speaking to eliminate background noises. Members may leave and rejoin the proceedings. However, if members depart the hearing for a short while for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or to depart to join different proceedings, they should exit the platform entirely and then rejoin it when they return. Members may use the software platform chat feature to communicate with staff regarding only technical or logistic support issues. I have designated committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceedings. With that, I'd like to turn to my opening statement. Again, to welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses for joining us today for the fiscal 2022 budget request of the Department of Defense for Fixed Wing Tactical and Training Aircraft Program. Today's hearing on tactical aviation is certainly one of the most important annual oversight events we hold in the subcommittee. This year, the hearing, even though complicated by the transition of a new administration to the extreme lateness of the budget submission and our committee's tight timeline for building this year's defense authorization bill, certainly more important than ever. This afternoon, we will be receiving remote testimony from a very large panel, 9 senior acquisition aviation leaders from across the Department of Defense. We will also hear from GAO representatives, our independent agency helping us evaluate investment decisions and execution of challenging, particularly the F-35 program. Overall, we're at a critical inflection point in time for the tactical fighter aviation, requiring the subcommittee's consideration, deliberation, and certainly decision-making. Each military service before us today has proposed significant initiatives in this budget that will begin to reshape the tactical fighter air forces to achieve what they describe as capabilities required to meet the challenges, to deter, and if necessary, act against a near-peer threat of the future. But what concerns me about DOD's current appearance is a deliberate indifference that this steady state rotational requirements that are continuing global military presence, responding to contingencies below the level of highly contested warfare, are no longer applicable, and I certainly would disagree with that. DOD currently equates the term legacy to mean old, irrelevant, dangerous, unacceptable in meeting our current or future requirements. I certainly disagree with this. I would offer that legacy should instead be replaced by existing, and that we should reference current force structure as existing force structure. And when assessing the existing force structure, it should be evaluated against a particular mission set for its relevancy or irrelevancy, supporting that particular mission, or strategic or operational risk associated with any gap in its availability or capacity. I believe that our aircraft capabilities do need to evolve and keep pace with our global competitors, which is a wide spectrum depending on which competitor we're trying to influence to achieve our national defense strategic objectives. I also believe that we need to maintain and achieve a proper, effective ratio of existing and next generation aircraft capabilities to meet those diverse missions at a level of risk that is well defined, clearly explained, and truly acceptable. Further, we cannot fiscally afford to divest in any existing aircraft in favor of buying the next generation high-end capabilities, and cannot fiscally afford having our next generation high-end aircraft supporting the enduring steady state presence or lesser contingency operation of our combatant commanders. The current design and capability of the F-15EX is not the same as the F-15C that rolled out back in the 70s. The current design and capabilities of the FA-18 Block 3 Super Hornet is not the same as the original FA-18 Hornet that rolled out back in the 80s. The F-35 and F-22 are perfect cases in this point as it relates to realistic affordability and planning to buy large numbers of advanced next generation aircraft. Those two aircraft, very capable and sophisticated when they work as designed, but neither currently works as intended often enough. And both are extremely expensive to own and to operate. This requires us to understand how both the Air Force and Navy next generation air dominance programs plan to avoid and mitigate the development and affordability pitfalls of the F-22 and the F-35 that experience or are experiencing, as this case may be for the F-35. For this hearing, we need to understand the path that each of the services is on to achieve that relevant mix of both combat and training aircraft capabilities, while maintaining affordability and acceptable risk informed by our fiscal realities. Speaking of the F-35, we had a very productive hearing already back on April 22nd this year. I don't want to rehash all those issues that we know so well today. For the record, I still maintain the same concerns that were raised at that April 22nd meeting, and therefore the subcommittee today expects to receive F-35 program updates on the status of resolving current maintenance and availability issues regarding the F-135 propulsion system power modules, the current status of TR-3 Block 4 developments and testing, and how the F-35 is progressing to achieve the cost per TAL per year affordability goals set by each of the services, particularly as it relates to the adaptive engine transition program technology will be finished and integrated into the F-35A and C models. This will help reduce the skyrocketing sustainment costs and improve combat capability. Certainly a lot on our plate with many distinguished speakers, but first I'd like to recognize our ranking member of the TAC forces, Mrs. Hartzer, for her opening remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of our witnesses for their dedicated service to this nation, for your support of our servicemen and women and each of their families, and for being here to provide testimony on the budget request for fixed wing tactical and training aircraft modernization programs. Recognizing the hard decisions and challenges imposed on all of you by the President's proposed budget top line, I look forward to working together to determine what is the right balance to prioritize and fund both current tactical readiness and modernization investments required for future capabilities. It is critical that our tactical fighter aircraft force is capable of keeping pace, deterring, and if necessary, and lethality of your fighter aircraft fleets. And I look forward to the discussion.
Excuse me
are
one moment.
capable and ready to deter our adversaries in the near term as well. From a strategic and operational risk management perspective, I expect the witnesses to address how their future plans are impacting the current readiness and sustainment of existing tactical aircraft capabilities. I have consistently expressed my concern that the Navy's decision to end procurement of the FA-18 Super Hornet beginning in fiscal year 2022 creates too much operational risk in the near term, given the Navy's current shortfall of 49 aircraft. I want a full assessment from today's military witnesses of the risks, specifically in terms of potential aircraft shortfalls, gaps in capabilities, industrial base impacts, and future costs. Each of the military services is accepting within its existing tactical air programs in order to develop and buy the fighter aircraft fleets of the future. This information is critical for myself and members of this subcommittee as we review the military services plans for divestments, decreasing fleet sizes, squadron relocations, and significant unfunded priority requests, and make decisions for this year's Defense Authorization Act. So I thank the chairman for organizing this important hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I was the only one that was not hearing your full testimony, but I believe I'm looking at others that are having difficulty, Vicki, just to give you a heads up. With that, I'd like to turn to our panel of 9 witnesses who are joining us today. First, we have Ms. Darlene Costello, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Lieutenant General David Nahum, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force for Plans and Programs. Mr. Jay Stephanie, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Lieutenant General Mark Wise, Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Aviation. Rear Admiral Andrew Loisel, Director of Navy's Air Warfare Division. Dr. Raymond O'Toole Jr., Acting Director of Operational Test and Evaluation for the Department of Defense. Mr. Joseph Noguera, Acting Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation for the Department of Defense. Lieutenant General Eric Fick, F-35 Program Executive Officer, and Mr. John Ludwigson, Director of Contracting and National Security Acquisition for the GAO, the Government Accounting Office. With that, we would ask each of our witnesses to try to adhere to the 3-minute opening remarks, and we will go right down the order as I just introduced you, starting with Ms. Darlene Costello.
Good afternoon, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having us here today to provide testimony on the Department of the Air Force's fiscal year 2022 budget request for fixed-wing tactical and training aircraft programs. Additionally, I want to thank you for your continued leadership and dedication to the United States military and Department of the Air Force. Air superiority is essential for military operations and protection of joint forces, and it has been our asymmetric advantage for more than 70 years. To keep pace with emerging threats, we must refresh our fighter fleet with a mix of 4th generation and 5th generation aircraft, as well as selectively modernizing our existing aircraft to ensure the right capacity and capability to fully implement the National Defense Strategy. In the FY22 budget request, the Air Force TAC Air portfolio of approximately $12.2 billion includes procurement of 48 F-35s, 12 F-15EXs, key modifications to both our F-22 and 4th generation fleets, and investment in technologies for our next generation air dominance efforts. In addition, we've requested $2.7 billion to not only continue procurement of some of our key munitions, but also to invest in munition technologies to counter future peer threats in highly contested environments. The F-35A will be the cornerstone of the Air Force fighter fleet for decades. We are fully committed to the F-35 and its 5th generation capabilities. While sustainment costs have come down, they are still not where we need them to be. We are evaluating opportunities to further reduce the costs of material and manpower, and will continue to work with the Joint Program Office and industry to address affordability. The A-10 remains an effective close air support platform for the current fight, re-winging the A-10's most significant modernization effort, and we have purchased wings to outfit a fleet of 218 aircraft. In FY22, we will continue executing FY21 funding to begin installs and support engineering change orders and other government costs that are typically required to execute major modification efforts. Our investment in next generation air dominance technologies is critical to ensuring air dominance within the emerging threat environment for future joint operations. In this program, we're incorporating agile and digital acquisition practices that are yielding favorable results and providing greater value for the taxpayer. In terms of propulsion, the extensive prototype ground testing, we continue to demonstrate and validate the benefits of adaptive engines. These include increases in fuel efficiency, thrust, thermal management capacity, all which could translate to the warfighter as increased range, loiter time, and aircraft capability. Again, thank you for your leadership and support of the Department of the Air Force. Lieutenant General Nahum and I look forward to answering any questions you may have for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant General?
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for having us here today to provide testimony on the fiscal year 22 budget request of the Department of Defense for fixed wing tactical and training programs. Additionally, thank you for your continued leadership and dedication to the United States military, the Department of Air Force's 689,000 total force airmen serving around the world today. As you know, our nation faces a complex set of current and future security challenges that require we think and act differently and with urgency. Our citizens face threats from a variety of actors in both physical and digital arenas, and our competitors continue aggressive efforts to negate our long-standing warfighting advantages. As we continue to work with each of you, it's becoming apparent that our collective understanding of the threat is increasing, and we are waking up to this challenge. Together, under this committee's oversight and leadership, along with our industry partners and innovative airmen, we remain the preeminent power projection force in the world today. In light of this, I'd like to briefly outline some important elements of our tactical and training portfolio that are of specific interest to you. Extensive wargaming and analysis make it clear that we must reassess our future fighter force mix and adjust investment priorities to provide the capability, capacity, and affordability required to meet a pure threat. Modernization programs cannot transform our fourth generation fighters into fifth generation or fifth generation fighters into the next generation air dominance. In concert with the Office of Secretary of Defense, the Air Force is in the final stages of a comprehensive tactical air study that will help inform our decision to build the correct mix of capability and quantity that our nation needs to win against near-peer competitors. We have recently reviewed some of the preliminary findings from these studies, and we will gladly share the results once we have finished our final analysis. Regarding the F-35, it is a cornerstone of a future fighter fleet, but is still complementary to other capabilities required for a winning force mix. While the F-35 today is a formidable platform, it faces challenges to ensure it stays dominant against an evolving future threat. To keep pace with the threat in the future contested scenarios, follow-on modernization efforts centered on Block 4, enabled by Tech Refresh 3 hardware, must be affordably realized on competition-relevant timelines. The F-35 operating costs, as currently projected, and long-term sustainment costs are areas of concern that need continued focus to work to address affordability. For the remainder of our fighter force, the Air Force is building complementary capabilities with the F-15EX and the next generation air dominance. The F-15EX will provide a role in critical infrastructure defense and the ability to deploy outsized weapons. Njad, or next generation air dominance, which benefits from full digital engineering and production, is a revolutionary leap forward in capability that will help us ensure air superiority for the joint force in any future scenario. I am honored to serve on the same team as Ms. Costello, and we look forward to answering all your questions regarding our tactical and training aircraft programs.
You're recognized.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Department of Navy's tactical aviation programs. Sustaining our naval TAC air superiority is critical to engaging in competition now and winning the high-end fight if necessary. We thank Congress and this committee for your support over these programs. The Department of Navy is committed to investing in the aviation and strike weapon programs we need to support our national security priorities. In fiscal year 21, we will deliver 54 new manned aircraft and 4 unmanned aircraft to Navy and Marine Corps units. These aircraft will improve our aviation capabilities to address the pacing threat. To fulfill our nation's commitment now and our strategic investments in the future, the FY22 budget request includes funding to procure 48 new fixed-wing aircraft. Most of these aircraft are 5th-generation Joint Strike Fighters, including 20 F-35C carrier variants and 17 F-35B short takeoff and vertical landing variants. The budget request also maintains consistent aviation depot funding and increased flying hours funding, both of which will improve our aviation readiness. To address a couple of items in your invitation letter, during the FY22 budget development process, the Navy identified an opportunity to drive efficiencies into our operational test squadrons. The department will maintain full operational test capability of F-35, FA-18E through Gs, and other high-end systems, including our next generation jammers and burst. However, with aviation capitalization nearing completion, in FY22, we will execute some manning reassignments from our operational test squadrons while maintaining the rigor and sufficiency required for effective weapon system operational tests through the combined use of developmental testing and fleet squadron assets. As the current service acquisition executive for the Joint Strike Fighter program, I'm working closely with all 3 U.S. services, the Office of Secretary of Defense, Joint Strike Fighter Program Office, and our industry partners to continue reducing the program's cost and ensuring timely warfighting capability upgrades, all while implementing a sustainment strategy that meets the fleet's needs. That starts with having predictable schedules and realistic cost estimates for all development and sustainment efforts, and that has been my focus this year. For example, after much discovery and cost growth last year, the tech refresh development effort has been on budget for the last 2 quarters and is tracking to meet the required Lot 15 cut into that capability. We are also working closely with our industry and the Joint Strike Fighter Organic Engine Heavy Maintenance Facility at Tinker Air Force Base on the depot repair recovery efforts. These efforts focus on increasing power module throughput by reducing the technical assistance timelines, standing up a second shift at the depot, accelerating the planned stand-up of additional enterprise depot capacity at various locations such as FRC Southeast, and increasing engine time on wing through module and mini-module sparing. Overall, this budget represents the deliberate and informed development of a modernized, integrated, all-domain naval force for the future fight to meet an uncertain and complex security environment. Thank you once again for the opportunity to appear before your subcommittee today, and we all look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Mark Wise, you're now recognized.
Yes, sir. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and discuss the Marine Corps plan for tactical aviation. First, I'll address our existing TAC air capabilities. The F-18 Hornet and the AV-8B Harrier have served us well and are now the Marine Corps bridging platforms for our transition to 5th-generation fighter aircraft. They have benefited from continuous readiness and sustainment investments we initiated in fiscal year 17. Both platforms are capable and ready, but require continuous modernization to maintain lethality, survivability, and 5th-generation interoperability. Programs to extend the service life of the Hornet, such as the high flight hour and center barrel replacement efforts, have extended the service life up to 10,000 hours. The aircraft will operate until fiscal year 30. The AV-8B effort, called Reclamation in lieu of production, provides F-402 engines to account for planned attrition through the Harrier sundown at the end of fiscal year 27. Next, as we address our peer and near-peer competitors in today's great power competition, we continue to broaden and deepen our understanding and experience with the F-35 Lightning II. The F-35C will integrate and deploy for all Marine Corps Global Force commitments to include carrier Airwings as part of TAC Air integration with the Navy. The F-35B, which can land vertically, will deploy with Marine Expeditionary Units and elsewhere. As we continue our transition to F-35, we have 2 fleet replacement training squadrons, 6 operational line squadrons, and have provided aircraft to 1 operational test squadron. Operationally, the Marine Corps F-35Bs are deployed currently with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit in the Indo-PACOM area of responsibility. Additionally, 10 F-35Bs are deployed aboard Her Majesty's ship Queen Elizabeth as part of the Carrier Strike Group 21 joint deployment of the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Netherlands. With respect to force posture related to our Commandant's Force Design 2030, the Marine Corps contracted with Johns Hopkins University in 2020 to study our TAC Air transition plan and force posture. Completed this spring, this study, along with ongoing wargaming and experimentation, will help determine the appropriate number and size of Marine Corps F-35 squadrons in support of force design priorities. Currently, the F-35 program of record remains at 420 total aircraft, 353 Bs and 67 Cs. As we look to the future, continued investment in the survivability and lethality of the Lightning II and of its current and future suite of weapons will ensure we are able to counter and defeat our peer adversaries and others have asked to do so. Marine Corps Tactical Aviation is ready, it is lethal, and it is fully integrated into operations with our partners of the United States Navy, the Joint Force, and is interoperable with our international partners. Enabled through continued congressional support, the Navy Marine Corps team is deployed forward and postured to address threats around the clock and around the world. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Losell. You are now recognized.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today and discuss the Department of the Navy's tactical aviation programs. TAC Air's striking power within our carrier Airwing, delivered from the 11 most survivable airfields in the world, the nuclear aircraft carrier, is vital to controlling the seas and providing long-range fires necessary to win the high-end fight. As we modernize the carrier Airwing to pace the threat, we continue to balance the correct mix of 4th and 5th generation fighter aircraft. Today, the Navy is managing FA-18 inventory requirements through service life modification, SLM, and previously authorized procurement, and F-35C requirements through continued procurement. This month marks the maiden deployment of the Navy's first F-35C squadron, BFA 147, embarked in USS Carl Vinson with carrier Airwing 2. The F-35C transition plan is predicated on a stable procurement profile and on-time delivery. The Navy is committed to Tech Refresh 3 and Block 4 upgrades for all aircraft in the Navy's inventory in order to reduce long-term sustainment costs associated with maintaining both TR2 and TR3 configurations. The Navy will continue to learn and better quantify costs, mission capable rates, and operations of the F-35C as we conduct our first deployment and continue transitioning to our 4th and 5th generation mix. Our operational test squadrons will continue to provide critical test support to ensure all fixed-wing aircraft are poised and ready for high-end requirements. Delivering these transformational capabilities to frontline forces as soon as possible remains our top priority. The President's Budget 22 continues the positive trend in arresting our strike fighter shortfall. F-18 SLM, combined with changes to the Master Air Plan, changes to the Navy Adversary Roadmap, and returning 28 Super Hornets from long-term down status, has allowed our strike fighter shortfall to be eliminated by 2025, according to current annual analysis. Strike fighter shortfall will be controlled in future years with the 78 new production F-18s that will continue to come off the line through 2025 and varying the SLM induction rate as required. Our focus on increased aircraft availability with a commitment to appropriate mission capable rates allows us to manage the correct footprint of tactical aircraft across the naval aviation enterprise. We are laying the groundwork for the highly networked airwing of the future with the next generation air dominance family of systems that leverages manned-unmanned teaming and will deliver overwhelming firepower in contested spaces in the years ahead. We are prioritizing funding to accelerate development of the 6th-generation capability and other key aviation wholeness investments to ensure the Carrier Airwing will maintain dominant strike fighter capability and capacity to face the most stressing threat through the 2030s and beyond. We are developing methods to achieve the required training and readiness, utilizing tactical surrogates, live virtual constructive range integration to improve training fidelity at a reduced cost. As a naval aviation enterprise manages fiscal constraints, we thank Congress and this subcommittee for your continued support of important aviation priorities, including flight hour funding, critical aircraft upgrades, and investment in future capabilities. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Dr. O'Toole, you are now recognized.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today. I've submitted a formal statement for the record and would like to offer just a few introductory comments. While a majority of the F-35 initial operational tests and evaluation, including open air testing, is complete, one essential element of the T&E program remains: trials in the Joint Simulation Environment, or JSE for short. The JSE is the only means, other than actual combat against a peer adversary, to assess the F-35 against the threat types, density, and operational scenarios we expect it to face. DOT&E therefore cannot issue its IOT&E report without the data the JSE would gather from executing the planned 64 trials. I cannot yet comment on the F-35's operational effectiveness, though I can provide in the closed session the results of the F-35 A-10 comparative testing. Suitability metrics show signs of slow improvement over time, but in many areas still fall short of required thresholds. I cannot address F-35 survivability in an open forum. F-35 Block 4 program already is underway. The current development process, known as Continuous Capability Development and Delivery, or C2D2, is supposed to deliver a new tested and verified increment of software every 6 months. However, each increment has been flawed, more flawed than expected. Further, software changes intended to add new capabilities or fix deficiencies have instead introduced stability problems that adversely affected certain existing F-35 functionality. I'm cautiously hopeful that the program office's decision to move to a 12-month software cycle will mitigate some of these issues, but I remain concerned about the ability to conduct adequate operational T&E of Block 4. More broadly, DOD's T&E enterprise is now at a crossroads. DOD's mission success and our national security reflect the quality of the operational tests and evaluation we perform. A large number of new and complex technologies are in the development and acquisition pipeline, and our adversaries continue to advance their capabilities. To be able to properly test the systems we intend to buy against the threats we expect to face, DOD must invest today in creating a robust T&E infrastructure with both live and synthetic environments equipped with cutting-edge tools and staffed by people with deep expertise. Simply put, we cannot determine a system's combat credibility nor thoroughly prepare our warfighters if our test and training capabilities are not kept up to date. DOT&E appreciates the committee's continued emphasis on the value of T&E and allocation of the resources necessary to deliver combat credible systems. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this panel today. As always, I would be happy to meet with any of you or your staff for a more detailed discussion. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Noguera, you are now recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Defense's collaborative effort to develop, acquire, and operate an appropriate mix of tactical aircraft. These efforts prioritize China as the pacing challenge while addressing threats emanating from Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I would like to thank your staff and the staffs of the other defense committees for the hours they have dedicated to discussing this important topic with us. Their insights have been very helpful. In the interest of time, I'd like to succinctly address your three questions to CAPE. First, in support of the FY22 budget request, CAPE conducted several analytic efforts assessing the capability, capacity, and readiness of the department's tactical aircraft. Several of these studies were directed by Congress to include the 2020 independent cost estimate for the F-35 program and the 2021 assessment of F-18 EF service life modifications. To support major defense acquisition program milestones, CAPE generated independent cost estimates for the F-15 Eagle passive active warning and survivability system program and the next generation jammer low and mid-band programs. In addition, CAPE oversaw the Joint TAC-Air synthetic training analysis of alternatives and both the Air Force and Navy next generation air dominance analysis of alternatives. CAPE also conducted other internal analyses directed by department leadership to investigate TAC-Air survivability, lethality, overall affordability, and novel concepts of operation to support combatant commander needs. Taken together, this work provided critical decision support to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary in making final decisions in this portfolio. Second, as part of the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress tasked CAPE to complete analyses on the service acquisition strategies for sixth-generation aircraft, as well as a non-advocate review of the Air Force Digital Century Series business case. Both studies are currently underway, and CAPE is engaged in detailed discussions with the program offices, contractors, and other stakeholders to gain the necessary data and insight to inform the department's evolving acquisition approach and satisfy congressional reporting requirements. The Digital Century Series business case review should be complete in August, and I expect to send it to you shortly thereafter. Third, there are a number of separate but closely related analytical efforts underway across the department to determine the appropriate balance of sixth, fifth, and fourth generation capabilities. CAPE is leading analysis focused on TAC-Air affordability and the key trade-offs between capability and capacity. The Joint Staff, in coordination with the combatant commands, is leading the department's thinking on how TAC-Air should be employed in a future conflict. Finally, the Air Force and Navy are conducting TAC-Air studies focused on assessing both near and long-term requirements. The results of these efforts will inform the National Defense Strategy and decisions to be captured in the President's fiscal year 2023 budget submission and associated future years defense program. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions today and a continuing dialogue about TAC-Air investments.
Thank you, Lieutenant General. Thank you. Now recognized.
Thank you very much. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the F-35 Lightning II program and for allowing me to address how the F-35 is bringing exceptional capabilities to the services tactical aviation portfolios. This program continues its dedicated focus on capability, affordability, and availability, and we will continue to work with the services to ensure we meet their warfighting requirements at a price our taxpayers can afford. Since appearing before this committee in April, F-35s have continued to deploy and operate worldwide in support of the United States and our international teammates. In addition to the Indo-PACOM embarkation mentioned by Lieutenant General Wise, a U.S. Marine Corps F-35B squadron is deployed today with our UK allies aboard the HMS Queen Elizabeth, showcasing the value of the F-35 partnership as well as the capability and interoperability of this amazing air system. At the same time, the USS Carl Vinson has embarked on the Navy's first operational deployment with the F-35C. These deployments complement those previously conducted by the U.S. Air Force and the home station and deployed combat operations of our warfighting customers around the world. In these environments, around the world and around the clock, the F-35 continues to deliver war-winning combat capabilities. More powerful than the hardware itself, however, these combined operations telegraph impactful messages of partnership and teaming to our adversaries around the globe. In our tireless pursuit of affordability, I am pleased to announce that late last month, the program reached a handshake agreement with Lockheed Martin on a 21 to 23 air vehicle sustainment contract that emphasizes improved aircraft full mission capable rates and continues cost reductions for all our services, partners, and customers. Over the last 90 days, our TR-3 and Block 4 progress has stabilized. And while we're not out of the woods yet, I am encouraged by the team's improved performance in capability development and delivery. I am similarly pleased with the progress the team is making on our F-35 logistics systems, including the progress we're making fielded upgraded Odin hardware and planning for the new Odin data environment and software. Finally, I will share that on 2 June 2021, we completed our final open-air initial operational test and evaluation trial, and thanks to the independent assessment of the joint simulation environment and the successful execution of our May full mission threat event, I am increasingly confident we will be able to continue and complete development of the JSE in order to execute the final 64 runs of IOT&E. We will update the Defense Acquisition Executive on our projected timeline in August, which will inform our acquisition program baseline and the timing for milestone C in our full rate production decision. The F-35 continues delivering incredible capability to our warfighters today. The operational value of this air system will only improve as we continue to drive cost out of the program, expand our global sustainment enterprise, and deliver future increments of capability that will outpace our enemies and serve as the foundation of the multi-domain integrated warfighting concepts in development now across the department. Thank you for your time today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Ludwigson, you are now recognized.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss GAO's F-35 acquisition work. The F-35 remains DOD's most expensive acquisition, intended to provide decades of air power superiority, replacing a large portion of our tactical fleet and serving critical roles in the fleets of our allies. GAO has examined the F-35 since inception. The program has not always followed key acquisition leading practices and has moved ahead despite recurring challenges. Our early reports raised concerns about technology immaturity, high levels of concurrency, unrealistic cost and schedule estimates, and the prospect of deferred capabilities. Much has been done at great cost to turn the idea of the F-35 into an operational aircraft. The baseline development program is nearly complete, but as I will discuss, key challenges remain. With regard to the baseline program, a few recent findings included, despite 13 years building the plane, many manufacturing processes were not meeting metrics for production consistency. Recurring supply chain challenges, including late deliveries and shortages, were compounded by the need to replace Turkish suppliers of over 1,000 parts. Several reliability and maintainability metrics were still not being met. While many deficiencies were closed, those still open remain high, 864 deficiencies, including 8 critical. And finally, the program has again not completed the simulator, which in turn has delayed the full rate production decision. Our recent Block 4 modernization findings are similar to early baseline program findings. In 2018, we reported that the Block 4 effort began without a business case, technology readiness assessment, cost and schedule estimate, test and evaluation plan, and an approved acquisition strategy. Last year, we found that the Block 4 cost estimate previously provided to Congress did not reflect all development costs. And finally, this year, we reported that some Block 4 capabilities had been deferred, the schedule was not realistic given the recent development pace, and the contractor had not followed its own software development process, leading to late discovery of defects. Over the years, we've made many recommendations. For example, we recommended that prior to moving into full rate production, the program should resolve all critical deficiencies, meet all R&M metrics, or formally reassess those metrics, and provide Congress information on production risks remaining with plans to mitigate them, including those in the supply chain and the production processes. Clearly, the F-35 has followed its own path and has already built a high percentage of aircraft under low-rate initial production. However, we maintain that the full-rate production decision is a critical point for weapon system development. The myriad challenges with the F-35 confound U.S. efforts to modernize its tactical fleet in order to face near-peer adversaries and modern threats. Delays and high costs of the F-35 could impact the size and composition of the tactical fleet. Nonetheless, the challenges remaining with testing, production, supply chain, and the Block 4 effort, along with sustainment and affordability issues, raise questions about how many aircraft can realistically be produced on time in the near term while supporting fielded aircraft and heighten the need for continued congressional oversight. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions the subcommittee members may have.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their statement, and we will now transition to some questions. Certainly a huge portfolio in front of us today, but I'd like to start out with following up on some of the statements that a few of the witnesses talked about. So let's start out with General Nahum and Mr. Nowera. The Air Force Joint Staff have currently undertaken those studies that each of you have mentioned, but I want to dig down a little bit more. Can you provide us with, you talked about the status, but the scope and the timing that we can expect that full report, but more importantly for today in the discussion, some of the early insights and findings and possible recommendations, understanding that the full report isn't finished. Also, the Marines and the Navy involved in any of these studies? Let's start with you, General Nahum.
Thank you, Chairman Norquist, for the question. And for the broader DOD studies, I'll refer over to Joe Noguera for clarification there. I'll try to keep my remarks specifically to the Air Force, to the service study. It really looks at our fighter fleet where we sit right now. You know, with seven distinct fighter fleets we sit on right now, with a fleet average this year approaching 30 years old. We have some problems with our fighter fleets, and we're trying to arrest that and actually modernize a fleet as well as make it more lethal and make it match up to the threat that's here today and the threat that's coming with near peer competition. And you've heard the chief talk about 7 to 4 plus 1, and that is certainly part of our TAC Air study. For the timing, our TAC Air study, we're just finishing it up now. I've seen some preliminary results on it. We're doing some final analysis. We're hoping to have that available for conversation by the end of the summer. And right now, we're just working through the final approvals on that too. You're hearing the chief talk.
Something you can share with us at this point?
Yes, I would say that the big thing is the 7 to 4 plus 1, which really gets at what is our fighter fleet going to look like in 10 to 15 years? And we see 4 fighter fleets, one at the very high end, the next gen air dominance. The next is the F-35, as we've talked about for a long time, as a cornerstone of our fighter fleet. That fighter that can do things that our F-16s and A-10s do today, but do those things in contested environments. And then we think there is a place for the F-15EX and carrying those outsized weapons, as well as its ability to do critical infrastructure defense. And then the fourth, very important, the Air Force is tasked with a lot of capacity missions around the world. I call it affordable capacity, that's sitting in Afghanistan for a long time, which is no longer there, but where is that next location? The Homeland Defense caps, all the things that we don't need F-35s and F-22s doing, but we as an Air Force must do. The F-16 does them very cheap and does them very well. What does that look like in the future? Right now, the good thing is we have F-16 post-block, the newer F-16s out for the next 15 to 18 years, and we're going to take advantage of those. Those may someday get replaced by F-35s. We don't know that yet, but we do know we need that affordable capacity. Then the last is the plus 1. We have A-10s. We'd like to go down to a fleet of 7 operational squadrons, 218 airplanes. We have them for the next period of time that we can use for those lower end missions. So that is that plus 1. So that is a big, broad stroke where you're going to see this TAC Air study going. It's going to drill down with a lot of analysis on how this looks, sir.
Well, thank you. Very good at covering the end story, and I look forward to that. Mr. Nowera, can you share some of your insights on what we have so far and where we might be going?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right now, we are really setting up the analysis, working closely with the Joint Staff as well. Our work is really, we're taking a look at a variety of strategic and operational concepts, trying to set up the models themselves so we can do a number of different analytic looks to support the National Defense Strategy Review that's underway right now. So we have aimed our work to come to fruition towards the middle of the fall to support program budget review decisions by the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary. That is in line with what the Joint Staff's TAC Air mix. So these are sort of very compatible and complementary studies, if you will, that we will bring these together, as I said, towards, I think, the September-October timeframe, sir.
So to the degree you can have that conversation in an open forum, obviously when F-35 started, 20 plus years ago to the point that it becomes fully capable 25 to 30 years. Certainly when the program began, some of the developments that our near peer competitors are able to look at us with were not around. The F-35 is a very capable aircraft and will continue to be used. But when we start to make these critical decisions moving forward, is there anything you can share with us at this meeting before a year from now that would help enlighten us to try to focus on that mix that we're talking about?
Yes, sir. I think the evolving nature of the threat, which has been happening quite rapidly in the last 2 or 3 years, you might recall CAPE led a TAC air mix study that went to Congress in 2017. There's been a lot of change in the threat the last few years. And as we've watched that happen, we are starting to see the need even more so for the F-35 and its full Block 4 capabilities. That is critical to being able to execute the emerging operational concepts that we see coming out of all the services and emerging from the Joint Staff itself. Because of those needs, we also see in assessing the two analyses of alternatives that the Air Force and the Navy did on next generation air dominance, we fully understand and expect that those kinds of requirements and technologies, not necessarily the platform itself, but think of the technologies writ large and the weapons, which is critical that we actually have the weapons produce and arrive on time. That is what we need for the 2030s, mid 2035 timeframe. So the programs that are in the FY22 request are exactly the kinds of things that we're starting to see early indications of in the analysis we've done. It's consistent with past analysis, but as we've seen the threat evolve rapidly, it's even more critical that we get those as we expect them to. And as you know, sir, that we have experienced some issues with that.
And certainly in the time frame we need it.
Yes, sir.
I'll get another round after we go through, but first let me turn it over to my ranking member, Mrs. Hartzler. Vicki?
Hi. We'll try here. I've switched to my phone, so hopefully, can you hear me now? Pretty good? All right, very good.
Good.
So last year, the Navy briefed the committee that it predicted a strike fighter shortfall of 49 aircraft in fiscal year 2021 and a shortfall of 12 aircraft in fiscal year 2024. Furthermore, the Navy was not forecast to achieve its strike fighter aircraft inventory goal until 2030. But now, for FY 2022 planning, the Navy asserts that the strike fighter inventory shortfall will be resolved to zero in FY 2025, which is 5 years earlier than planned. Absent a revised FYDP or additional explanation, the committee is uncertain of the accuracy of the Navy's new analysis. Since the FY21 budget submission, the Navy has delayed the fielding of its planned FA-XX aircraft over what was planned last year. 2, removed 104 FA-18EF Block 2 aircraft from the planned Service Life Modification or SLM program. And 3, failed to raise the F-35C procurement quantity to the 24 aircraft per year that the Navy has previously testified was necessary to bring down the strike fighter shortfall over the next decade. It seems that these factors would exacerbate the shortfall rather than expedite the resolution of the shortfall prior to FY 2030. So, Mr. Stephanie, specifically, the budget request for the Navy did not request any funding for continued procurement of the FA-18EF Super Hornet aircraft, an aircraft the Navy calls its workhorse. And it decreased the procurement numbers for F-35C from the FY21 projected 20 aircraft to only 15 aircraft. Noting that the Next Generation Air Dominance program has just begun defining aircraft requirements and development concepts, how does the Navy plan to manage tactical aircraft inventory risk and reduce the current strike fighter inventory shortfall absent continued procurement of the FA-18EF Super Hornet aircraft and increased procurement of the F-35C above plans?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. So first of all, F-18, a very good aircraft. We really support that aircraft as well as the F-35. But a number of things have changed in the last year as far as the ability of us to meet that shortfall. And while the points you brought up are very accurate, we also have a different mix of aircraft in the fleet going forward. And I really would like to turn it over to Admiral Lizelle because he actually has the detail. We will come over without the fit. We need to come over and actually brief you, ma'am, all the way through the process so you can see it all the way through. But at the top level, Admiral, would you kind of go through the things that have changed in the last year?
Absolutely, sir. So, ma'am, we've made several changes to the map. So we have taken the F-35C portion of our 44 strike fighters and reduced that from 2 squadrons of F-35s down to a single squadron, but then increased the number of tails in that squadron from 10 to 4. So we had adversary requirements for our fleet out at Fallon and in our reserve squadrons. And so in our previous plan, those were F-18s. And now in Fallon, we have taken some F-16s from the Air Force and Air National Guard to relieve that requirement. And we bought F-5s from Switzerland to relieve another squadron's worth of reserve F-18 requirements. And our NAMC population of professional maintainers has been able to return 28 Super Hornets from long-term down status and put those back in the fleet. So we believe that the combination of those improvements has reduced our strike fighter shortfall to 0 by 2025 based on current year analysis. This is an analysis that we repeat on an annual basis and based on current budget projections. We believe that the SLM lines, we have 2 lines operating, will have the additional capacity during the time at the 25 period in question to take additional SLM tails should our current analysis be revised, and we require that additional capacity. We believe the infrastructure will support additional modifications to the Block 3 status.
So unfortunately, there was a little bit of a delay and I wasn't able to quite hear all of that answer. But regarding the SLM lines, these aircraft are coming in with a lot more salt damage than originally thought, and it's going to take longer to be able to produce them. So how are you able to say that you think we're going to get additional aircraft through SLM with the condition of these aircraft?
Yes, ma'am. Take that, sir. Okay. So all of our Block 2 aircraft that we are planning for SLM, we intended for our first 30 aircraft, and we're about halfway through that now, to be a learning platform. So agree 100% that there was damage beyond expectation from a corrosion perspective on some of the initial aircraft. However, Boeing is seeing significantly improved condition in the aircraft that we are now submitting for SLM. So with the number of Block 2 Super Hornets in our current inventory compared to the number of Block 2 Super Hornets that we intend to conduct SLM on, that allows us some selectivity in those tails that we put through the modification line. And so we're learning in this process, and we're now conducting inspections prior to induction that are looking at these hard areas to identify whether or not the corrosion that's present in those aircraft justifies inclusion in our SLM process, or whether or not we might look at a different aircraft to conduct that on. But right now we are continuing to learn, and we are continuing to bring down the time associated with getting an aircraft through the SLM process. And we anticipate that by the 25 timeframe, we should be in full swing on 2 lines at 1 year per SLM aircraft at that point in time, in 23 and after, coming off the line in a full 10,000 hour modification in full Block 3 configuration.
So if there is a lot of corrosion, it sounds like you won't be bringing them in for the induction into the SLM program, but I don't see how that's going to help, because if they're in such poor condition that they can't enter the program, won't that just further delay a very bad situation and make it even worse when you do bring it in?
So ma'am, those first aircraft that we're looking at are aircraft that are right up against their 6,000 hour service life. And so much of that corrosion is mitigatable at the Navy's level. And so to reduce costs, we're looking at employing our own artisans to go in there and conduct those repairs prior to bringing it to Boeing. And if it's anything that is structural in that nature, then we have our engineers that take a look at those particular corrosion spots and make determinations as to the repair level that is necessary for that particular aircraft to get it through its remaining service life.
Okay, you talked about adversary support and moving a lot of these new aircraft over to play the role of the adversary, but there's also the issue of the Navy Reserve's only remaining strike fighter squadron, the AFA 204. They are currently available for contingency deployment, and they routinely conduct carrier qualifications, which is not possible for F-16s. If I understand right, you're going to be giving them F-16s instead of the F-18. So, Admiral Lewis, is the Navy planning to walk away from that mission and the ability for VFA 204 to activate in a time of crisis?
So, ma'am, the sole reserve squadron that will retain F-18 capability is BFA 12 in Oceana. And so that decision was made in order to single site the Super Hornet maintenance at either Oceana or Lemoore. And so VFA 204 is planned to go to F5s because they are the closest to our other VFA squadron down in Key West, and they provide the predominant level of support to our FRS training squadrons out of both the New Orleans ranges and the Key West ranges. The F-16s I mentioned are all going to be in Fallon, where we are currently operating F-16s, and we already have that maintenance support in place there. So we right now will have a single reserve squadron flying Super Hornets.
Okay, very good. Well, I have some additional questions, but I'll yield back and allow other members to go ahead and ask their questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have on deck Mr. Carvajal, Turner, Horsford, and Whitman to give you a little bit of indications coming up. We now recognize Mr. Carvajal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Norcross and Ranking Member Hartzler. And I appreciate the witnesses joining us today. When this subcommittee had a hearing on the F-35 in November 2019, I asked about the department's effort to develop an intellectual property strategy and the issue of DOD's inability to obtain IP and technical data across the entire F-35 supply chain. Then Undersecretary Lord and General Fick said that the DOD was in the process of doing a fundamental rewrite of all acquisition policy. General Fick, what steps has the JPO and the department taken since that hearing to address IP concerns in the F-35 supply chain and to develop the IP strategy?
Thank you for your question. In the time that's elapsed since the fall of 2019, we have continued to work to ensure that we have the appropriate intellectual property and technical data required to execute the mission of the F-35 and of the F-35 enterprise, to include the establishment and the stand-up of the component repair depots, each of which comes with the appropriate technical data to allow us to do so. We have established an intellectual property strategy that we are actively executing with a number of underlying guiding principles that lead us to conduct cost-benefit analysis of whether we should challenge a technical data assertion or an intellectual property assertion, or whether we should consider simply purchasing or securing the use of the intellectual property based upon our desired and required end state. So in short, it's not, and we talked about this a little bit in April, it's not about going out and getting all of the data, because getting all of the data, purchasing all of the data, or challenging Lockheed or Pratt to their ownership of the data would be counterproductive. We can't afford to buy all of that, but we need to go after the data that's required to allow us to do the things that we need to do. One of the places that we talked about in the in April had to do with our intention of expanding the authorities of maintainers on the flight line. Back in the beginning of the program, a maintenance concept was developed, and as we've worked to move forward and execute changes to our maintenance philosophy, our maintenance strategy, we've had to secure technical data associated with the steps required to perform those kind of tasks. We have over time, and this is actually since 2014, so not just since 2019, but we have assessed 447 different maintenance data changes. We've approved 207 of them, and we've actually completed 105 of them. And we anticipate the net savings associated with the stand up of that increased organic maintenance capacity to save us about $1.9 billion over the cost of the F-35 life cycle. So what we're executing in my mind is a broad initiative targeted at getting the data we need to do the things we need to do and not wasting time and money on things that are superfluous to that requirement.
Thank you, General. My second question, my colleague, Mr. Gallego, is unable to attend our subcommittee hearing today. So I'm asking the following question on his behalf. Lieutenant General Nome, should Congress prohibit divestment of the A-10 fleet once again? I would like to make sure the Air Force has made plans to keep the full fleet sustained and modernized. Perhaps most critical is the need to finish wing replacement across the fleet, as aircraft that do not have new wings are rapidly approaching the hours limit on their original wings. Last year, the Air Force requested $100 million to purchase 24 wing sets, and Congress fully authorized and appropriated this funding while also prohibiting divestment. So far, the Air Force has only placed orders for 2 wing sets with this funding, counter to congressional intent. Will you commit that should Congress prohibit divestment of the A-10 fleet once again, the Air Force will quickly move to place at least 22 more wing sets on contract? And if Congress provides additional wing replacement funding, the Air Force will execute that expeditiously as well.
Congressman, I'll start out, and then I'm out for the wing set. I'm going to lean on Ms. Costello next to me, but thank you for the question. The Air Force is not divesting out of the A-10 mission. Our intention with this year's President's budget is to reduce our A-10s from 281 down to 218. That is 9 operational squadrons of A-10s down to 7. And this is part of the transformation of our Air Force. The A-10 is a wonderful airplane. It's done incredible things for our nation. But we have to start repurposing some of the resources on the A-10 into some modern capabilities, specifically manpower. If we don't reduce the A-10 slightly this year, we run into extreme problems with maintenance.
If I could, the gentleman's time has expired. I gave 30 seconds extra. If we can, we'll come back to that next round. Obviously, that was a fairly tough question to answer in 17 seconds. So if you could allow the witnesses enough time as you ask your questions. With that, we'll turn to Mr. Turner. You're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Fick, engines for the F-35 represent a significant cost both in operation, maintenance, and in production. And the GAO report that we had showed that there's significant concern about the effects of the current engines for the F-35 and its effect on production, with the GAO report saying that less than 4% of the engines are delivered on time. As we look to trying to lower the overall costs for operations and maintenance, engines certainly are an area where we can pick up, both in lowering our overall maintenance costs, increasing our operational capabilities. And I was wondering what our current status is in looking at alternative engine configurations or future engine opportunities for the F-35 that can increase flight time, range, and lower overall operational costs. General Fick.
Sir, thank you for your question. First, relative to the 4% delivered on time metric, I don't challenge your data in any way, shape, or form. I believe that that's actually correct, but I do know that we have not delivered an aircraft late due to an late engine delivery, to my knowledge, in my time on the program, which dates back to 2017. So while I'll agree that there have been some late deliveries, by and large, it
This
hasn't
is an
affected.
important number, obviously, General. It's in the GAO report cited in
Yes, sir. Thank you. I will note also that despite the impact of COVID in 2020, Pratt did in fact deliver all of the engines that they had on contract plus one extra. So they actually did pretty good. But with that said, engine costs in sustainment are challenging. And as we rapidly approach the 2,000-hour first scheduled engine removal, we will start to bear those costs in the sustainment of the air system. And we also know that we have begun to reach a flat or a flatter spot in the learning curve relative to the overall cost of production engines. When I couple that with the notion that post the current Block 4 content, we will likely need increased power and increased thermal management capability from our propulsion system, I think that the need to look for options from a propulsion system perspective is present. I will tell you, I was I went to GE and Evendale about 6 weeks ago. I toured the line. I saw the work they're doing on AETP, and candidly, I was impressed. There's a lot of work to be done before that becomes a production engine, before that becomes a reality for the F-35 program, perhaps. But sir, I will pledge to work with my Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps services as we work to explore options and alternatives to addressing the F-35's propulsion issues moving forward.
Great, thank you. General Nahum, as the Air Force looks to retire aircraft, certainly the C-130H is on the block. In Mansfield, Ohio, there is a guard base which they operate. It could be affected significantly as a result of the decreased number of planes. There will need to be transitions for that facility and other facilities across the country. Could you please give us some information as to what the current plans are, or plan that's being taken? Look to future missions for facilities that might be losing the 130H, C-130H.
Yes, sir. Congressman, thank you for the question. We have said we would like to, our stretch goal is to reduce the C-130 inventory from 300 down to 255. Those 45 C-130Hs would be approximately 5 units. We've also said we stand by that we will not reduce any units with that unless we can find a mutually agreeable replacement mission. So we're working very closely with units that have C-130s to see if there's something out there that we can agree on. We've done this recently with Maxwell, the Air Reserve unit there, transitioning them to the MH-139, our newest helicopter, and we're looking for other options. One of the opportunities out there is cyber, and we're actually looking for a unit that is interested in taking on a cyber wing, because it's something we're going to need as we look at pure competition. But again, we're only going to look if we can find something mutually agreeable with the unit and the state.
Great. Well, General, I know that there's a number of people that would be very interested in that, so I look forward to additional discussion as to how you're progressing.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Horsford, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also to our witnesses for your service and your testimony today. I was very pleased that the Air Force recently selected Nellis Air Force Base, located in my district, as its 5th generation center of excellence. This selection not only reinforces Nellis's critical role in Air Force modernization, but also means that a substantial number of new 5th generation aircraft will soon be coming to Nellis. Lieutenant Nahum, very briefly, can you speak to any potential impacts on F-35 and F-22 basing decisions if the Air Force is prevented from divesting the requested 42 A-10 aircraft?
Yes, sir. Well, thanks for the question. And then we're obviously working very closely to make sure we can reduce the A-10 ultimately over 2 years at 63. In the 22 PV, it is 42 aircraft. You correctly say that. And it is important to reduce those because that it very much relates to Nellis Air Force Base and the 5th Gen Center of Excellence, because part of the problem at Nellis over the last 10 years is we continually poured stuff into Nellis, really without check. And now we have an overcrowding there, not only in the dormitories for the airmen, certainly in the airspace, and certainly on the ramp. So pulling out some of the non-5th gen related items at Nellis Air Force Base to make room for more F-35s is very important. And one of the things we would like to pull out of there is the rescue capability. Not only the weapons school and the rescue tests, but also the operational rescue, and pull that down to Davis-Monthan. What that does is that frees up space at Nellis for those 5th gen assets that come in. The place they're going to go down at Davis-Monthan is where some of the A-10 footprint is down there right now. And so by reducing the A-10, it allows us to open up this room for that 5th gen Center of Excellence as you discussed. So if we do not reduce those A-10s, we're just gonna have to go back and take further analysis and see what we can do. Right now, it will be problematic though if we keep all the A-10s as are in the system right now.
Thank you. I'd like to move to a broader national security issue. In the past weeks, we've seen the Taliban make territorial gains at a pace that was unimaginable just a couple of months ago. It's increasingly clear that we will need to rely exclusively on our over-the-horizon intelligence assets like the MQ-9 Reaper to ensure that Afghanistan does not again become a safe haven for terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. Last week, Secretary Austin said that while the effort to station ISR assets in neighboring countries was still a work in progress, ISR missions were already being flown from countries in the Gulf. General McKenzie told this committee last month that his #1 unfunded priority for Central Command was additional funding for the MQ-9 program. He assessed that planned reductions to the MQ-9 fleet would endanger both deployed and redeploying forces. This assessment was deeply concerning to me and other members, and I believe better reflects the reality on the ground as we complete our withdrawal. The risk assumptions surrounding MQ-9 procurement made by the Air Force when developing their budget request were based on a starkly different reality in Afghanistan, one in which the Taliban had not rapidly captured nearly 1/3 of Afghanistan's territory. The loss of control over broader regions is especially concerning to me, and I think it's a fair assumption that we will soon see a proliferation of anti-air assets in the country that could place many of our manned and unmanned aircraft at risk. I was pleased to see that the House Appropriations Committee plans to include funding for 12 new MQ-9s in the 2020 appropriations bill, and I firmly believe that we should follow suit to ensure that the program meets the needs of our forces on the ground and considers possible attrition of the aircraft. Mr. Costello, can you give any specific reasons why this committee should not authorize the procurement of these 12 MQ-9s, and what steps the Air Force has taken to reassess the risks of ending MQ-9 procurement given the rapidly deteriorating situation in Afghanistan?
In 4 seconds, so if you could.
Okay, so we're not reducing the MQ-9 fleet. We have 300 plus airplanes that will give us MQ-9s out into the mid-2030s if we have the fleet we have right now. We are not reducing any airmen that fly or fix those airplanes. We are actually just reducing some of the combat lines, which are very, very manpower intensive. The MQ-9 is very valuable, but also it has very much limitations. It's not an asset we're going to be taking into the South China Sea or in any kind of contested environment. So we have to have a good balance of our assets across the Air Force.
Thank you. Gentlemen's time expired. So on deck, we have Mr. Whitman, Ms. Cheryl, Jackson, Cahaly, DeJarle, and Mr. Brown. So with that, Mr. Whitman, you are now recognized. Mr. Whitman there. Not hearing from Mr. Whitman. Let's go to Mr. Jackson.
Wait a second. Here we are.
There you are.
There we go. It helps when I press the mute button. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant General Home, I wanted to begin with talking about what we've been through now essentially for the last 6 years, and that is the need for modernization and the balance between generating current readiness and modernization. And what we're seeing is that there are anticipated projections where conflicts brought over by certain flashpoints around the world like Taiwan may be upon us faster than what we had ever imagined. And essentially, looking at this balance, we have a couple of options, or actually 3 options, I believe, in front of us. We can increase the top line. We can compromise near-term readiness to fund modernization, or we can continue to pay the appreciating cost of aging platforms. So these are all challenges that we face. And in Sea Power, we're talking about the bathtub the Navy is going through and retiring legacy systems and bringing on new systems. The problem is all of the dreams about modernization come outside the future years defense plan, better known as the fit up. So we're going to do all these great things, yet we go through a bathtub of losing capability. And when I look at the Air Force's proposed divestments, I see that there are 48 F-15s we're going to retire, 47 F-16s, and 8 C-130s. And I have to ask, if you will let us know, what's the Air Force going to do to address this bathtub that you're going to find yourselves in with retiring all these assets as you try to take these savings and plow them into future assets, but many times those aren't going to be available for at least 5 years plus out in the future?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. I would say also over the last couple of years, we've brought on in excess of 300 F-35s now, and we've actually reduced very few fighters in that time frame. So we actually have to start getting rid of some of our older planes. So these F-35s we're bringing on, we have the resource, the manpower. And I'll tell you right now, we are really short on manpower, especially maintainers, because we continue to buy 48 F-35s this year, 48 F-35s plus 12 F-15EXs. We've got to retire some older airplanes so we can make room in the resources. And you're absolutely right. We've got to compromise. We've got to have that balance between that modernization and some of the aging platforms so we can continue to the capacity that COCOMs need today from their Air Force.
Very good. Thank you, General Home. Lieutenant General Fick, let me ask you, several months ago, there was testimony about engines for F-35s, about supply chain issues with parts for the engines. At that time, we were sure that those supply chain issues are going to be taken care of. It's been roughly 3 months. I said 2 months, but it's roughly been 3 months since that hearing. Can you give us an update on where we are with supply chain issues concerning the F-35 engine?
Yes, sir, I can. Thank you for your question. So in the 90 days that have passed since our last conversation on this topic, we have continued to execute the 3-pronged plan that we described there. The first of which is to increase our throughput at the Heavy Maintenance Center at Tinker Air Force Base. I'm working very, very closely with Lieutenant General Gene Kirkland, the Sustainment Center Commander out there, and with Matthew Bromberg, the President of Pratt Whitney Military Engines, to put a number of initiatives in place to include increasing tooling, reducing engineering disposition turn times, stand up of a second shift, the establishment of a rotable pool of mini modules that will increase capacity there, as well as the burn down of defects in the technical data. That work is going very well. We've actually seen over the course of our time there at Tinker, the turn time go from 240 days down to about 183, and our target by the end of this calendar year is 120 days. Since that time, we've also continued to work the stand-up of capacity at other locations. And of course, the third lever that we're pulling on is doing things to keep the engines on wing longer. We're actually actively investigating the CMAS issue that was leading to the coating degradation that we talked about, and I was last before you. And we're exploring ways to potentially leave those engines on wing longer based upon increased understanding of those mechanisms. The big picture result is we believe that now, and this number has changed since we last spoke, supply will equal demand from an engine power module throughput perspective in 2024, and we anticipate being recovered to a zero backlog by about 2029.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Fick. I want to get to Mr. Stefani real quick. A simple one-word answer. Looking at the window of potential conflict with China over Taiwan, if that were to happen before 2025, when you talk about the shortfall of strike fighters, does that shortfall today introduce unacceptable risk if that conflict scenario has moved to the left?
Sir, that's not a one-word answer, but I think our co-coms have seen it as a risk that they understand and would be able to address.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Sherrill, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Norcross. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and Madam. I want to start with Mr. Noguera. Given both the current cost overruns with the F-35 as well as the long-term operation and sustainment cost, which to meet current acquisition requirements will require the Air Force to come up with a 43% sustainment cost reduction and the Marine Corps to come up with a 24% cost reduction. I'm curious what other systems we're missing out on as a result of fielding these aircraft, which didn't perform well in recent strategic games, countering our pacing threat of China in the Pacific.
Thank you, ma'am. We've gone back and looked to try to find systems that have had to realize these kinds of cost savings, and we have not found anything in the previous cost estimates that we've done that have shown that. So I think you're right. Our cost estimate, our last ICE that we sent over in 2020, clearly lays out the challenges of bringing down the sustainment costs. And I think Lieutenant General Fick can speak to those specific steps that the JPO and the services are undertaking. But we agree with you, it's clearly challenging to reduce those costs.
And so you're not worried about some of the other systems we may be missing out on because of those continued greater than expected costs?
Ma'am, at this point, in terms of a capability that we think the department needs to meet the future threat, the F-35 fully deployed with Block 4 is really the capability that the department needs in this portfolio. So the challenge becomes then not so much, a combination of things. How do we bring those costs down to make sure that we can deploy the F-35 as expected? Because that, as I said, that capability is critical that we have seen thus far in the modeling that we've done.
So, Lieutenant General Nahom, over the past several weeks, I've had several concerning conversations with former acquisition and sustainment officials about the amount of risk we're taking on with other modernization priorities by continuing to shore up the F-35 program. I guess as a thought exercise, if tomorrow Congress stopped funding the F-35 program to get at this another way, what we're missing out on, what would your plan be to modernize our aircraft and perform the required missions?
Well, man, thanks for the question. And obviously, we're very concerned too. In the F-35, our chief has recently said that it is a very good aircraft, and the crews that fly it very much like what it does. But unfortunately, we're paying for outstanding, and we're not getting outstanding. So we actually, if you look at the F-35, although our numbers of F-35s have come down over the years, what we're purchasing, our level of funding has not changed and has continually gone up. So it is concerning to us in the Air Force of the increasing costs, especially in the modernization, as well as the ONS, the operation sustainment costs have not come down to the level where we would like. And I think you've heard that in our chief recently saying that right now we're filling in the holes for some of those capacity missions around the world with F-16s and A-10s. Well, eventually we said years ago that we were going to replace all F-16s and A-10s with the F-35. I'm not sure we're at that point yet where we can say that right now, because unless the F-35 comes down in its ONS costs, we will not be able to afford an entire fleet of fighter aircraft in the Air Force at that level. That's why the chief said there may be something else later on if we cannot get these costs down. So it is certainly a concern with the Air Force.
And General Hinote recently Lieutenant General Hinote recently noted that much of our current fleet was not effective actually in the simulated conflict against China in the Pacific. And in June, he mentioned a need for dispersed vertical lift capability for logistics. Do you see a vertical takeoff and landing capability as a future requirement for our fighter fleet? And if so, how do you see this changing your requirements in the coming years?
We do, and we're watching the technology very closely. Certainly our Army friends are involved with vertical lift and other technologies that are out there. You're seeing us with things like our Agility Prime and some of our other R&D efforts right now. If you look, and we'd have to get back into a classified setting to really get into this conversation, but if you look at the places where we think you're going to need logistics, there could be limited runway or no runway. So there will be a need for a vertical takeoff and land type of capability in the future. And I do believe that tactical lift as we see it today will change. And it's something we're certainly keeping an eye on, watching the technology very, very closely. And I would love to come back in a classified setting to talk more about this, ma'am.
I'd appreciate that. Thanks so much, and I yield back.
Mr. Jackson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Hartzler for holding the hearing today. I also want to thank each of our distinguished witnesses for being here. I've been pleased to see the department investing in technologies to field systems that are both lethal and survivable against a peer threat and move on from some of our outdated and costly platforms. One of these investments that I want to focus on is the Advanced Pilot Training Program and the new T-7 Alpha Red Hawk, which will replace the aging T-38 fleet that is flown in my district at Shepherd Air Force Base. This year's budget request contained a decrease in funding relative to what previous year's budgets had projected that we would need. Last month, I asked the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, about this decrease in funding. He told me it was caused by technical issues with the program that I think were related to a missed milestone. I understand there have been supply chain issues that have caused delays. Regardless, General Brown reaffirmed the Air Force's commitment to the T-7, which I was glad to hear because we absolutely need to update our trainer fleet. The theme of supply chain issues has seemed to be a common trend across many different programs. With the T-7 specifically, I'm told that we are having trouble with sourcing and establishing critical parts from the global supply chain. Ms. Costello, can you speak to some of the supply chain issues that the T-7 has faced? Also, do these supply chain issues have any link to reliance on a peer competitor such as China?
Thank you very much for the question. So you referenced supply chain issues, and that's something that we're seeing globally right now. COVID only exacerbated that across our entire industrial base. And the T-7 program is one of the many who is experiencing some of that. Unprecedented supply chain challenges. Boeing and T-7 is no different than anybody else. The TAL assembly is one example within the T-7 program that's affected because of reliance on international supply partners. We have to get through the COVID pandemic recovery efforts, and really then we can get back to where we were before. But every company is dealing with it a little bit differently, and every country is actually. We are committed to the T-7 program. That is one of the factors that led to the milestone C delay from first quarter to fourth quarter of 23. But it's not the only issue, but it was a contributing factor. And we will continue to work with Boeing and our industry partners to address and try to mitigate any of these supply chain challenges. We believe Boeing is working very carefully, and we have confidence we'll be able to mitigate that impact for T-7 programs specifically.
Yes, ma'am. And are there any things in the supply chain that are related to China in particular?
I can't say right now if there's any that are specific to China, but our entire force is intended to satisfy that mission requirement. So I can take that for action and come back and let you know if that would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And my next question is, some of the T-38s being flown in my district are over 50 years old, obviously. We can all agree that training in an aircraft built in the 1970s is not going to be adequate for training pilots for an F-22, F-35, or future fighter aircraft. Ms. Costello, as we have seen the T-38 in service for many decades, what is the projected timeline that we can expect to see the T-7 being used for pilot training?
So we were looking at an IOC for T-7 of 24. So our plan is to start transitioning at that point in time, the rate at which, of course, will be based on the deliveries. And of course, we do agree it's time to replace the T-38s, which is why we have the T-7 aircraft. And it is very important that we get those in place in time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. My last question, I would like to speak about the decrease in funding for the program and the delays that we faced. I understand why the funding request is at a level that it is, but I think I speak for all my colleagues when we say that we need to significantly reduce the number of delays that we are seeing in major acquisition programs. Many of our industry partners are working in the best interest of the department and working to help us build next generation systems that will allow us to compete with countries like China and Russia. Ms. Costello, while delays are usually unexpected, do you see any further delays occurring with the T7, or do you anticipate things being on time from here on out? And further, can you speak to how the department is working with industry partners to avoid any more delays?
So relative to the T7, we do not project any further delays. We believe Boeing has the supply chain issues being mitigated properly, and the particular software design issue that's been identified, the fix has already been identified. We have to go back and finish the testing to demonstrate and validate it. But we believe we can support the schedule based on sliding from first quarter to fourth quarter of 23. So we project we can still maintain our ISC and FSC dates on that particular program. And there are issues across acquisition programs that we work daily with industry in order to mitigate so that we don't have schedule delays. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think my time is up. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Cahill, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mahalo, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having this hearing today. My question is for General Nahom, and just for some background, my question is going to revolve around the C-130 aircraft. Recently, the Air National Guard leadership has called for installation of infrared suppression systems on the legacy C-130 aircraft, which is critical to protect against the man-pad threat. On June 23rd, an Ethiopian government C-130 was shot down. This was a C-130 that was provided to the Ethiopian Air Force by the United States by Tigray forces in the ongoing conflict in the region. That aircraft, obviously, it's a U.S. aircraft. It shares the same engines, the same general airframe, and the structure that many of our Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve, and active duty C-130Hs have. It's a unfortunate, vivid reminder of the constant threat environment facing our legacy tactical airlift fleet, not only from complex missile systems, but also widely proliferated weapons like the man-portable air defense system. So my question is, in seeking to counter this threat posed by man-pads, specifically for the Air Guard designated C-130H infrared suppression hardware as a critical need in the 2021 Weapons Modernization Priorities book, given that you previously stated that the Air Force intends to continue fielding C-130H models into the future, do you agree with the Guard's assessment that infrared suppression is a critical need for these aircraft? Do you also think that additional TTPs, tactics, and procedures need to be modified for the man-pad threat for a mobility aircraft like the C-130? Potentially C-5, C-17, and can you describe how the Air Force is addressing this critical need in its budget submission, and given the lack of a future year's defense programming this year, how this program will be implemented over the next few years?
Well, Congressman, thanks for the question. And I just looked around at my team too. I don't currently have anything in my book right now on where we are with C-130 counter man-pad. So I'm gonna have to take that for the record and get back to you. I do agree, though, that the man-pad threat is proliferating and it's everywhere. It's something we're very concerned with, especially with low-flying, relatively slow airplanes like a C-130. And I know as we look at our modifications across all our mobility platforms, I know this is something that the modifications of mobility platforms are very expensive, and I know working very closely with AMC and the Guard and the Reserve to make sure we prioritize correctly. But let me take that for the record, get back and tell you where we are on that.
Okay, thanks so much, sir. Then let me jump over to the ACC and what most of our conversation has revolved around, which is F-35, F-22, and our tactical fighter training programs. I guess specifically for the F-22, the Hawaii Air National Guard, we have a composite unit out there. We fly F-22s as well. We have F-22s out in Kadena, up at Elmendorf. So the Air Force maintains approximately 186 aircraft in this inventory. What do you see, sir, as the future of the F-22 as the Air Force Njad is developed, and is the Air Force planning to reduce any of its F-22 fleet prior to Njad being fielded?
Oh, sir, thanks again for the question. The F-22 is the dominant fighter of our time, and it needs to be. Our nation needs that dominant fighter right now. We intend to keep it that way in the near term. And if you look at our schedule for our modifications for the F-22 fleet, the 123 operational F-22s, and then the others you mentioned are our test training and weapons school, maintaining that over the near term until we get to the what next. And the what next is the next generation air dominance. We can upgrade the F-22s for a certain amount of time, and then at some point, the threat we know is going to outpace its capability. And that's why NGAD and getting at NGAD now is so important. Because we think the U.S. Air, what does the nation expect out of their Air Force? We know that our nation expects air dominance, and that's what the F-22 provides today. That's what the F-22 provide over the next decade or so, and then beyond that, we expect to do that with the next generation air dominance.
Do you foresee any potential fighter airframes being based at any future Pacific bases like Anderson or other bases that we may want to base these type of aircraft at to shore up the Pacific Deterrence Initiative and the China threat?
Sir, for that one, I'll be very careful. I really want to come back in a classified setting to tell you, because we're actually very actively talking about what the Pacific, as well as the European threat or friendly laydown is going to be in terms of our fighters. But I want to be real careful I don't say something over an open line. So I'd like to come back in a classified setting, if you don't mind, sir.
You bet, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. As I understand it, Mr. Vesey is the last one for first round. So from the home of the F-35, Mr. Vesey, you're now recognized. Mark, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I apologize.
There you are. You are muted. Although can others hear Mr. Vesey? Mark, we cannot hear you. Mark? Do we have him muted? Because it's showing on my screen as he is unmuted. Okay, we're going to go to the second round. Let's see if we can get a hold of Mark and work that out. In the meantime, he's going to look up and realize we didn't hear him. Anyway, so till we get Mark rolling, we're going to start our second round. And I'd like to start out just a clarification. Mr. Noguera, I think I heard you say during your testimony that a fully capable F-35 would be there to meet the need against our near-peer competitor, in particular China. Although very effective, we're looking at the next generation as one to truly be able to penetrate and go up against some of our near-peer competitors. Isn't that correct, or did I misunderstand what you said?
So, sir, without getting classified really quickly here, we think based on analysis we've done to date, we think the F-35 and its full capabilities, the Block 4 capabilities, is critical for the Chinese fight going through, the 2030s. NGAD, Njad also will play a vital role. In particular, as Lieutenant General Naho mentioned, NGAD for the Air Force is the air dominance platform. But I think beyond that, we should come back and talk to you classified to really go through that.
We're on the same page. I thought I misunderstood what you said.
Yes, sir.
It wasn't China or Russia. It was someone. Mark, can you hear me, Mark? You're muted during your question. You still are. So we want to see if you can work that out, and then we'll recognize you as we go on. I want to switch back to follow up on some of the questions that Mr. Turner talked about with regards to the power module and the F-35 engine and the maintenance issue. So this would go to Mr. Stephanie, Ms. Costello, and General Fick. For the F-35, how many aircraft today do not have engines? let's start out with that question. And then from there, I want to go into the capacity and repair issues at the F-135 Heavy Maintenance Center in Oklahoma. But first, how many aircraft do we have today, 135s without engines?
So Jay Stephanie from the Navy Marine Corps. Marine Corps is 0 right now. And the Navy, we're just, as you know, we're just starting to field aircraft. So I believe we're at 0, but I would have to take a look up on that.
And from the Air Force, as of July 8th of this month, we're 41 F-35s are without an engine and 56 F-135 power modules are in work at the repair facility at Tinker. I think General Fick can speak to the other actions.
Yes, sir. I will tell you there is some difference of opinion relative to the total number of MICAP engines. I know that in some corners, aircraft that are long-term down are being counted against the MICAP count. Those count in some times and don't count in others. But to Ms. Costello's point, if I look at the 41 U.S. aircraft, my information as of today says I have 41 U.S. Air Force TALs using Ms. Costello's math. I have 3 partner aircraft. I have 1 Marine Corps aircraft, and I have 1 U.S. Navy TAL that are MICAP for an engine. Some of those are power modules. Some of those are MICAP for other reasons.
Well, thank you. And you made a point to suggest, General Fink, that not one delivery of an aircraft was delayed by the engine, which is obviously very important. You know, we've had issues, Turkey, we all know that, and set us back a little bit. The pandemic, no question about it. But additionally, what I call in some ways a self-inflicted wound is those additional aircraft that we purchased that were not requested. And the idea of rolling out a new aircraft with an engine while others are sitting, and I'm hearing the numbers and we can argue over which ones they are, but are certainly something that is of real concern. And as we have heard in testimony, the idea is to make sure those engines are available, just as importantly in the depots. So let's talk about the F-135 Heavy Maintenance Center in Oklahoma. The status of that, increasing repair and the capacities. Where are we today in terms of the operation and the parts that they need to perform?
Yes, sir. If I can conflate the two questions relative to Pratt & Whitney's ability to deliver production engines throughout the pandemic, we've actually pulled 6 production engines forward and sent them to the field to take advantage of their ability to continue to deliver. And we've actually pulled 12 power modules forward from calendar year 22 into calendar year 21, again, to help leverage some of that capacity to help the field and fleet. Relative to the progress at Tinker, they've done a good job of optimizing the maintainers on the floor, really treating them like we treat surgeons in an operating room, finding ways to keep them on the engines longer, on the power modules longer, and make them more effective at what they do, whether it's increased training, increased access to tools. We have moved the needle from a heavy maintenance center production perspective. Now, conversely, we have also seen in the time since we last spoke an increase in the removals of power modules as a byproduct of the same phenomenology that we saw over the summer with the CMAS degradation. These are power modules that should have been found over the course of the last 9 to 12 months, but due to deficiencies in our ability to execute the bore scope inspections in the field, they were left on the aircraft longer than usual. We have been working very, very closely with the Air Force to help with the bore scope inspection procedures. We've removed those power modules from service, with the exception of a few who are being monitored very, very closely for the progression of damage. We're using this as an opportunity to learn from the aircraft in the field at what the progression of this coating degradation and turbine blade distress looks like.
Thank you. What I want to do now is turn it over to Ranking Member Hartzler, and then I understand Mr. Vesey has returned. We'll give him another shot. But Vicki, you're now recognized.
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to ask a question about the F-15EX. So in addition to the budget request for funding for 12 F-15EXs, the Air Force also submitted funding requests for an additional 12 F-15EX aircraft in its FY22 unfunded requirements list. So could you elaborate, General Nahum, on why the procurement of these additional 12 aircraft are critical in FY22?
Yes, ma'am. Ranking Member Hartzler, thank you for the question. So, if you look at our aging aircraft and the F-15C that these EXs are replacing immediately are very problematic. Right now, the Air National Guard will tell you they have 20 airplanes that are long-term grounded. We have several airplanes, active duty and guard at our depot that are long-term grounded for cracks. Getting the F-15C that is well past its service life retired and getting its replacement as quickly as possible is a concern of ours. We were only able to put 12 EXs on our original budget. If there's additional money, this would be greatly help us in not getting the F-15Cs replaced and keeping these fighter operations open. I am worried as the F-15Cs retire, if we retire them on time, about not having enough aircraft in the right places to keep these operations continuous. So the additional airplanes would be very, very helpful. And the EX, and the reason we put EXs over F-35 is the EXs are ready to go. If F-35s are coming off the line right now with full TR3 and Block 4, it would be a different discussion, but they're not. So that's why there's EXs there, man.
You bet. Okay, thank you. I also wanted to ask about a different take on the F-35 engine. We know that Congress and the taxpayers have invested over $4 billion in the last decade to mature adaptive cycle engine technology across multiple engine companies. Those programs are culminating this year with testing of full-scale prototypes of engines designed to integrate with the F-35. My understanding that these can bring transformational capability improvements in aircraft range, acceleration, and thermal management capacity that will be needed to support the Block 4 Tech Refresh 3 enhancements. So how are you integrating this capability into your long-term F-35 roadmap? And do you intend to capitalize on the significant taxpayer investment that has been made to this point and transition this capability to our warfighter? And what timing do you think is appropriate?
And man, thank you for the question. I'll start and I'll let Ms. Costello take a hack as well. We are very excited about this technology. And as General Fick said, it's very, very impressive. Not only the fact of having an alternative power plant for the F-35, but the capability this brings with its efficiency, and as well as its increased power, greatly enhance the capability of the F-35. We are going to struggle, though, as an Air Force to bring this to any kind of operational capability because we got significant investment, you said, to get this technology, but there's another significant investment that's needed to integrate this into the F-35. And right now, given the current top line we have right now, we're going to struggle to get any further with this technology. Sorry.
And as you said, you'll have this test information in FY22, and we're working closely with the JPEO in order for them to understand it and plan it in their future. But we do have fiscal issues we have to consider too, and integration costs have not been factored at this point in time. Thank you.
Hey, you bet. Thank you. And I don't know if Mr. Carbajal is still on or not and ask the question for Mr. Gallego about the A-10s, but if he's not, then maybe we can circle back and get some clarity on the replacement and the budget and what has been spent and hasn't. So thank you. With that, I'll yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. As I understand it, Mr. Vesey is connected. So Mark, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Very good.
Okay, awesome. I wanted to ask, neither the Navy's FY22 budget request or its unfunded priorities list included new F-18 Super Hornets. And when asked about this during the most recent FY22 budget hearing, Admiral Gilday testified that the Navy has procured as many F-18 Hornets as it needs. He went on to say, we're at the twilight of fourth generation purchases and we are picking up the pace on fifth gen. I was wondering, do you concur with General Gilday's comments that the Navy is pivoting to fifth generation fighters, and was just hoping if you had a comment or a thought on that, that would be, I think that would be interesting.
Yes, sir. So I'll start and then pass it over. Yes, we have the right transition, the right mix of Generation 4 and Generation 5 aircraft in our air wings going forward. And while we have a shortfall in the near term, by the time any aircraft that would be bought in 22 would show up, we will address that shortfall per the plan to get by the end of 20 or in 25 to get that to a zero shortfall. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emil Rizal.
Yes, sir. Just a little bit more specifics on that. We currently are executing a multi-year procurement of F-18, 78 total. We've got 70 left to deliver that will deliver between now and fiscal year 25. So they are continuing to add to our totals of F-18s throughout the next time frame. That's why I think we can get to SLM and modifications of current F-18s after that time frame. You mentioned the UPL. We have 5 F-35s on our unfunded priority list as well to try and accelerate that transition, because the F-35C is the last customer. We have the smallest number of tails in the F-35 fleet thus far in the Navy. So we're in the mid 50s right now. And so that will allow us to accelerate our transition to a 4th, 5th gen mix.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's really important that if that will help pick up the pace, as Admiral Gilday pointed out, that's really good information for the committee. Lieutenant General Nahom, the Air Force has been procuring F-35s at a rate nearing full production for the past several years. Air Force leaders have testified that the F-35 is coming off of the production line today, that they have the best break rate in the Air Force. Recently publicized data showed F-35s having the best mission capable rate out of all of the Air Force fighter fleets in 2020. And despite these significant achievements, the Air Force FY22 budget proposes reducing F-35's annual procurement below last year's appropriated level while purchasing additional 4th gen fighters that have not produced at rates for the Air Force in roughly 20 plus years. As the Air Force tries to mitigate a fighter shortfall, how does this revised acquisition plan not add additional risk? And how does the Air Force plan to mitigate this risk?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. So, we have the 48 aircraft on our budget, and the reason we didn't put them in the UPL is as these aircraft come off the line, these will not be in the Tech Refresh 3 Block 4 configuration. Every aircraft that the Air Force buys before we get to that point, we're going to have to spend money to retrofit. And so right now we're watching that very closely. As I said before, the F3, and your stats are right on. The MC rate, the crews that fly this airplane love it. It's doing great work. It is a very, very good airplane. We're paying for outstanding though, and we would like to get this aircraft in the configuration we need, which is the Tech Refresh 3 and Block 4 modernization. We're committed to the F-35, and we truly believe it is the cornerstone of our future fighter fleet.
Yeah, thank you very much, General Nahom. In the 25 seconds or so that I have remaining, an article that I saw from just a few days ago. I wanted your quick comment on it, and that's the Air Force's F-16 Boneyard project that you're working on. Is that going to be something that y'all are just going to do just for the F-16, or is that going to be something that can be used for other models, for other platforms?
And sir, let me tell you, and I did read about it. Let me, and that, are you talking about the digital twin piece that's come out?
Right, exactly.
Darlene, you have anything on that, or we can take it for the record?
I think we need to take that.
Yeah, we'll take that for the record, sir, and we'll get back to you on that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Mr. Jackson, if you're still with us, you are recognized. Mr. Jackson, are you still with us? Going once, Mr. Horsford, are you there? Okay, not hearing any of them. Vicki, we're back to you. You are now recognized until one of the others return.
There you go. Great. Just if you could finish up and clarify, I believe Mr. Costello or Ms. Costello, excuse me, you were answering the question or someone about the ATN. The budget request for fiscal year 2021 contained a request for $99.9 million to purchase 24 wing sets, which of course, as you know, Congress fully authorized and appropriated. So as wing replacement for the entire fleet is a critical element of the fleet sustainment into the 2030s. But we have learned recently that the Department of the Air Force has not yet obligated the vast majority of fiscal year 2021 funding for additional wing sets. And the Chief of Staff of the Air Force stated in congressional testimony, May 7th, 2021, that the Air Force planned to execute 55% of the remaining fiscal year 21 funds by the end of the fiscal year. So that's obviously not 100% of the funds that Congress provided for the wing sets. So does the Department of the Air Force still intend to obligate the full fiscal year 2021 funding for additional wing sets during this fiscal year, consistent with Congress appropriated and authorized? And if please explain what the Department of Air Force plans to do with the remaining funds authorized and appropriated for additional wing sets if you're not going to spend them on new wings.
Thank you very much for the question and the opportunity to clarify. So we do have, we have procured all of the wing kits that we're planning to with the FY21 funds. The final 4 wing kits are spares and are going to be on contract in August of 2021. The first article is going to arrive in the fourth quarter of 22. 3 LRIP articles are going to arrive at the beginning of 23, and the full rate production fourth quarter. So we're on track for procuring to support our planned fleet size of 218 aircraft. The balance of that funding is planned to do the installs and continue the work there. And we do plan to have it fully obligated and expended in accordance with our required timelines. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now you're back.
Thank you. So let me, unless somebody else is still with us, let me just follow up on the F-35 TR Block 4 development. Mr. Ludwigson, major risk where we foresee the F-35 program and the upgraded. Where do you see us going, and what is our largest risk before that comes online? Obviously, you hear about the buys that we're making and trying to wait till that is fully capable before we buy those additional planes. But we can't wait, but we have to be able to plan. Won't you bring us up to speed from where you sit and what you see with that upgrade?
Are you asking about the Block 4 upgrade or the risks in general as it relates to the program?
The risk to not having the TR3 Block 4 in the timeliness that we need it.
Well, I think that some of the other witnesses have clarified that they're still aiming for insertion for the Lot 15. The challenge is, as I understand it, they're still conceivably going to be installing TR2 kits during the production and then retrofitting those tails before they're actually received by DOD. So you've built in this retrofit cost because of the delays that have occurred with relation to final development of the full TR3 kit. And I think that as a lot of the witnesses have also noted, the Block 4 capabilities are really instrumental to why F-35, right? I mean, F-35 has a lot of characteristics that are pretty helpful, I think, for the warfighter, but the Block 4 capabilities are what you really need in the high-end fight.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm the only one hearing, but your sound is broken up. But I got most of your answer. So General Fick, let's talk about Alice and Odin. I know it's your favorite subject, right? Certainly the issues that we're addressing, and when Mrs. Lord was on board, thought that transition to Odin, quite frankly, would be quicker, easier, and more helpful. Give us an update on where we are in terms, and this is the difference between readiness and Chairman Garamendi and the joint meeting that we had, because it's important when we look to the future on what we're going to buy, we need to know where the system's going to be. So bring us up to speed on Alice, Odin, and where you think we're going with that.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you very much for the question. We continue to make progress along the Alice to Odin transition plan that we discussed back in the April timeframe,
Right.
which relies upon deliberate and consistent upgrades to the Alice baseline, so that we can both increase decrease the pain experienced by the users as they continue to use that system over time. And then put us in a place where we can seamlessly transition into the new Odin software and capabilities. Now, remember, Odin is not just one thing. Odin is a hardware kit. Odin is a new software environment, and Odin is a new underlying data environment. All of those things are being simultaneously developed. The delivery of the new Odin base kit is really helping the field. As we push it out there, it's 75% smaller physically, it's 90% smaller in weight, and it's 30% cheaper than the legacy hardware that it's replacing. And we're getting great reviews from the team, and we're also getting great reviews from our interactions with the users. We have established what we call a joint Alice working group, where we actually interact with the units in the field as they work to establish the user agreement and the capability needs statement that we talked about last time, and then to prioritize the fixes that go into Alice as we work our way into Odin. I think that over the course of the last 9 to 12 months, we've decreased the admin workload time by about 40%. We've decreased air vehicle flight download time by about 30%. We've decreased the air vehicle transfer time from days to minutes. We've increased or enhanced the cybersecurity posture of Alice by making a transition to Win 10. The team is doing a lot of work, both on the near term and fixing Alice, while at the same time ensuring a smooth transition into Odin.
So let me just dig into that a little bit. So you talked about the decreased time, the speed that we're now doing it. And is that with the new hardware using Alice? Or is that with the new hardware using the Odin? So what is the base that those figures are coming from?
Yes, sir. So those decreased download and processing times are using legacy hardware and the upgraded Alice software. Our next steps are going to be to what we call deprecate or break up the Alice spaghetti code into discernible chunks that we can then begin to transition into Odin. And whether we use them as is, or whether we change them, whether we hire someone else to do that work, or whether we use Lockheed or a commercial off-the-shelf product to do those functions. Those are those next steps that we have to do to allow us to make that transition smoothly and seamlessly. So the results that we've seen from a software perspective and a processing time perspective are largely Alice software on legacy hardware. The improved hardware, the target hardware for Odin, if you will, is showing even better progress.
So why all of a sudden is Alice working better, quite frankly? We collectively made that decision with yourself, Mrs. Lord, that we were going to keep the intellectual property. Lockheed's going to have that, and we're going to have our own Odin that we, in essence, control. Yet here, which is good news, all of a sudden, these numbers that you just shared with us are great. Why is Alice all of a sudden working in a better form and fact?
So, sir, I don't want to leave you with the impression that everything's rainbows and unicorns, right? We still have a lot of work to do with respect to Alice. But I think that what I've seen over the course of the last year is that my team and the Lockheed team really buckled down and decided that, you know what, we have to do this and we have to do it together. The environment in the fall of 2019, when we first set about this transition, was I'm going to say was bitter and contested. It was adversarial. It was tough going. As we started down that path, and as we learned more about what it would take to actually transition this system in a smooth and seamless way without impacting the user, that we were going to have to team and do this differently. So I think in part the relationship's better. I think the expressed and executed intent to do the quarterly releases based upon solving user pain points has been a huge win for the program, as we've been able to focus on those things that make the most difference to the maintainers on the flight line. I think those things are all positive as we move forward. And then, again, the feedback that we're starting to get from the users is, what, we like the way you're going as you transition to Odin. Let's make sure you don't lose all this. So I think
I'm still going to
Sorry, go ahead.
transition to Odin, that original concept that was rolled out.
Yes,
almost
sir,
2 years.
absolutely.
Thank you. With that, do we have anybody else waiting? Vicki, do you have any more questions?
No.
I can't wait to get back to live. We're obviously having some challenges, but I want to thank all the witnesses. We had a very full agenda, to say the least, and we really appreciate the answers we're with, and we have a couple of follow-ups. With that, we are adjourned.